organization that is dedicated to helping people better understand the world around them. I'm going to be pretty quick here tonight because I know the Senator has a very busy schedule and needs to get out of here, so we want to make sure that we have enough time to really dive into some great questions from the audience. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate your interest in having these global discussions. We feel it is vital that people know what is going on around the world, and we view ourselves as the platform for discussions. So this is a part of our on foreign policy conversations with the candidate. We have 4 events next week as well. You can see more about that on our website. We hope that you all take the opportunity to hear from as many candidates as you can. We are a membership-supported organization, and we appreciate the strong community support we receive to continue to run these programs throughout the year. I want to thank our partner, New Hampshire Civics, for helping us promote this out to the widest possible audience, as well as the other organizations who are helping in that. So, moving to Senator Hassan, thank you so much for joining us here tonight. We really appreciate it. Senator Hassan has spent many years in politics, 6 years in the New Hampshire Senate, 4 years as New Hampshire governor, and was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2016. So up for re-election, of course. She has a great background in some of these key issues that we'll be talking about here tonight. And so I will turn it over to the Senator, and then we'll get to some questions once she's done. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tim, so much for that nice introduction, but also for your leadership of the Council. And thank you to the World Affairs Council of New Hampshire for having me here tonight. New Hampshire's proud tradition of civic engagement is deepened by organizations like yours, connecting our community to some of the foremost leaders in foreign affairs and helping us go beyond the headlines to better understand issues around the globe, issues that, as you know, have an impact right here at home. I'm speaking to all of you tonight during a consequential moment in our country and world's history, with ongoing aggression from Russia and China and evolving threats ranging from terrorism to cybersecurity to climate change and more. American leadership is more essential than ever. The global challenges of today are urgent, they're complex, and they are interconnected. And so much of what happens abroad has a direct impact on our country and our people. We've seen, for instance, how a virus originating thousands of miles away can, within months, shutter a family business in New Hampshire. Or how Russia's unconscionable invasion of Ukraine can send gas prices soaring and drive up food costs all around the world. As I approach the challenges facing America and our world today, there are a few key principles that I believe must be foundational for American foreign policy. First, the need to show strength to nations and bad actors who seek to hurt us. We cannot waver in responding to our enemies. Second, the recognition that our economic security is directly tied to our national security. And third, the importance of fostering international cooperation and engagement with our allies and partners, because no one country can meet the challenges of today alone, and we're stronger when we all work together. This approach is grounded first and foremost in a steadfast belief in the power of our democracy. Our democratic values represent some of our greatest sources of strength, and they're at the core of our security, our stability, and our freedom. We can never lose sight of the fact that our commitment to democracy at home and abroad drives American leadership and makes us the beacon of opportunity and prosperity all across the world. Today I'll discuss how our commitment to our values, to national and economic security, and to building strong partnerships helps protect us from the threats of today and tomorrow, including threats posed by authoritarian regimes. So how can we bolster our defenses against the ambitions of authoritarian regimes like Russia, China, and Iran, who seek to undermine our democracy and economy? And threats to the homeland, specifically what we can do to protect our homeland against evolving terrorism and cybersecurity threats, as well as better secure our borders. So to begin, Vladimir Putin's unconscionable invasion of Ukraine is one of the most pressing challenges impacting global security and our economy. It exemplifies two things. One, why the United States must never waver in responding to our enemies. And second, the importance of global alliances. We have an obligation to stand with our allies in the face of aggression, and we must continue to make clear that an unprovoked attack on a sovereign nation will not be tolerated by the United States or by our partners in the international community. When Russia began this invasion in February, it was clear that it was a threat not only to the Ukrainian people, but to peace, security, and stability all around the globe. In the months that followed, we have seen ongoing brutality from the Russian military, but also the incredible bravery of the Ukrainian people who, in face of horror, have stood steadfast in their fight for freedom. In response to Putin's invasion, I've worked across the aisle to provide critical military assistance to support Ukraine in this fight. And in partnership with our allies, our country has imposed crippling consequences on Putin, the companies and people close to him, and the Russian economy through severe sanctions. We've also made clear that Putin is a war criminal, and that his barbaric attacks on civilians, including women and children, will not be ignored. As the war continues, we must stay vigilant against Putin's attempt to evade sanctions or to prop up his economy, and his attempts to continue to fund this war. For example, I successfully led bipartisan efforts to close a loophole that had allowed Russia to sell off its gold reserves, which it began to do as the sanctions began to really hurt. We also must continue to engage with our NATO allies and rally more and more countries around the world to keep standing up to Putin. I was really encouraged by the recent vote in Congress to welcome Sweden and Finland into NATO, which will help ensure an expanded, united front against Russian aggression and the protection of freedom around the world. As I noted in my introduction, America's foreign policy must always recognize the importance of economic strength as a key component of our national security. This includes pushing back against China, which has repeatedly worked to undermine our prosperity and democracy, to say nothing of its human rights violations. In 2019, I traveled with my colleague, Senator Coons, to China to meet with Chinese leaders face-to-face and make it clear that the United States will stand strong and protect our interests, while also working to find areas where our countries can engage and work together. In our efforts to take on China, I'm encouraged by the united bipartisan front that our country has built to stand up for American interests. Republicans and Democrats agree. In order to remain the most powerful country in the world, we must take strong action to maintain our economic and military edge. Our country recently took an important step forward in doing just that when Congress passed and the President signed into law the CHIPS and Science Act, bipartisan legislation to strengthen supply chains, lower costs, outcompete countries like China, and strengthen our national security. I've been working on this legislation with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for the last year and a half, and I'm really proud that we've brought this bill across the finish line. It's an extraordinary commitment to our economy and our security. China has invested more than $150 billion to build its domestic manufacturing capacity of semiconductors, and America is frankly far behind. Nearly 4/5 of global manufacturing of semiconductors now takes place in Asia. This law will help change that. It invests $39 billion to make more semiconductors here at home, and we're investing $11 billion in semiconductor research and development so that we can be world leaders in semiconductor manufacturing once again. I was just down in Hudson yesterday at a ribbon cutting for a new business that is making key components for semiconductors right here in Hudson, New Hampshire, really for the rest of the world. And this bill has been a critical step forward in doing that. By protecting and growing our manufacturing base at home, strengthening our economy by lowering costs and securing supply chains, we reduce our reliance on countries like China and we bolster our national security. Passage of this bill was a key step forward, but we have to continue working together to take on China all across the board. For example, to keep our military on the cutting edge, I worked with a Republican colleague to write and pass legislation to ensure that America's armed forces, not China's, remain the world leader in quantum technology. Continuing to stand up to China will require us to use all of the tools at our disposal to unleash American innovation and help our military keep its cutting edge. In these areas, members of both parties have made clear that they are committed to doing so, and I'll keep looking to support America's technological and military strength. Now, as Russia and China continue to dominate much of the press attention in Washington, we also recognize that other countries and non-state actors remain persistent threats to our security. This, of course, includes threats from North Korea and Iran. I'll start by discussing North Korea. As part of my 2019 trip to China, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, I met with South Korean officials as well as American diplomatic and military personnel. We also met with defectors from North Korea. That was and continues to be one of the most powerful meetings I have had as a United States Senator. America must play a key role in stopping North Korea, which is a dangerous totalitarian regime. We have to stop them from unleashing nuclear attacks, particularly in the wake of the country's ongoing ballistic missile tests and the previous administration's appeasement of Kim Jong-un, which has really set us back. To counter North Korea's threat, we must reestablish and maintain a strong global coalition to pressure Kim Jong-un in order to achieve denuclearization. I'll continue to work with our allies to focus on diplomacy and to impose severe sanctions on North Korea for its nuclear ambitions and its human rights abuses. As we address the nuclear threat from North Korea, we also know that we have to continue to work with the international community to prevent rogue nations like Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. To that end, in 2015, I joined with the national security and foreign policy experts from both parties in supporting the Iran nuclear deal. No, it wasn't a perfect deal, but it was the best available path forward to preventing the regime from obtaining nuclear weapons. And still today, as the administration and our allies work to reestablish an agreement, I believe negotiators should seek to take into account the full scope of Iran's actions, including ballistic missiles and support for terrorism, and ensure that we retain sanctions on Iran and its Revolutionary Guard. I've also worked with my Republican colleague, Senator Tim Scott, on a bipartisan effort to ensure that we keep in place U.S. sanctions on Iran that Congress first opposed in the mid-1990s. These sanctions are important to restrain Iran's ability to pursue weapons and technology that threaten our national security. Any nuclear deal is only the first step, though, in a broader strategy. That strategy hinges on us helping protect regional security and strengthening ties with our allies and partners in the region, including Israel. To help address stability in the region, I traveled to Israel in 2018, and I heard firsthand about the safety and security concerns that the Israeli people face each and every day. This included a meeting with the Prime Minister as well as the Defense Minister. In each of our meetings, we reaffirmed our deep commitment to Israel, which we know is more essential now than ever. We also discussed the indispensable role that America must play in working towards peace in the Middle East. We are and must always be Israel's strongest and most dependable ally, supporting Israel's military and diplomatic efforts to endure and thrive in the face of existential threats. Ensuring security and stability around the world also requires that America be vigilant and focused in addressing terrorist threats. After 9/11 and the horrific attacks on our homeland, our country went to war in Afghanistan, and for 2 decades, American service members put their lives on the line to dismantle al-Qaeda, combat terrorism, and keep our country safe, secure, and free. I visited Afghanistan in 2019 to meet with U.S. military commanders, troops, and State Department personnel, spending much of the trip with the then head of U.S. Central Command, General Miller, as well as our ambassador to Afghanistan. We met with the top leaders in Afghanistan, including their president, defense minister, and national security advisor, as well as Afghan civilians. I also traveled in that trip to meet with leaders in Pakistan, who can also play a key role in stabilizing Afghanistan and engaging in counterterrorism efforts, although we all know that their region in this regard is pretty mixed. And as we all know, the last troops left Afghanistan last August, and today the Taliban is once again in control of Afghanistan. I opposed the president's decision to withdraw by an arbitrary deadline when he announced it, because I had seen firsthand how precarious the situation was in Afghanistan and the importance of making a decision based on facts on the ground. And I have voted to conduct a formal review of the failures over time that led to the Taliban's return to power. Now, moving forward, I'm continuing to push the administration to deliver on a strong strategy, including one that combats terrorist threats that come from Afghanistan. Our military and intelligence community completed an important mission by taking out 9/11 architect Ayman al-Zawahiri in Kabul just last month. The fact that he was living in Afghanistan's capital, however, highlights the dangers of terrorist activity in that country. We have to stay vigilant and continue to work to prevent Afghanistan from once again becoming a safe haven for terror groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS-K. Of course, we also know that we need to confront terrorism at home. The reality is that terrorist groups persist in their efforts to radicalize and recruit people from all over the world, including inside the United States. Domestic terrorism of all types is also becoming more frequent and more deadly. As a member of the Homeland Security Committee, I'm committed to defeating terrorism in all of its forms. And these threats are frankly always evolving. And we too must continuously adapt to stay ahead of those who wish to do us harm. I've been proud to work with colleagues from both parties on counterterrorism efforts. I worked with Republican Senator Marco Rubio to pass a bill that was signed into law that brings together intelligence, operational, and policy-making elements from across the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, in order to devise joint strategies to deter and disrupt potential terrorist attacks. I also introduced a bill that became law to help DHS better identify potential terrorist threats by streamlining our information systems so that our intelligence community can move faster. And as terrorists have continued to target houses of worship and nonprofit organizations on U.S. soil, I've led efforts to help secure these facilities against potential terrorist attacks. We, of course, have more work to do to address terrorism threats, and part of that is addressing emerging threats like cyber attacks. The frontier for cyber attacks remains vast, and we must constantly evolve our efforts to respond to the newest kind of cyber threat. Countries including China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea have engaged in complex cyber attacks, espionage, and disinformation campaigns against our government and the American people. These nations and other hostile actors have the capability to wreak havoc on our entire economy. They can disrupt critical financial, defense, health, and energy infrastructure, for instance. We've seen these types of threats here in New Hampshire with cyber attacks on places like schools and local governments. So as chair of the Homeland Security Emerging Threats Panel, one of my major areas of focus is protecting and responding to cyber attacks. At my urging, we included in the bipartisan infrastructure package that is now law a new grant program to provide $1 billion to states and municipalities to help them defend against cyber attacks. This builds upon a law that I authored that has placed cybersecurity coordinators in states all across the country, including in New Hampshire. These coordinators help state and local governments combat threats like ransomware. As we work to give states more support, I am also working to increase coordination at the federal level and have led a bipartisan effort to increase the number of cybersecurity professionals within the federal government. And to ensure that we're addressing the next frontiers of technology, I joined with Republican Senator Rob Portman to introduce a bipartisan bill to strengthen national security by preparing the federal government's defenses against quantum computing-enabled data breaches. will continue to face new cybersecurity challenges in the years to come, and we must ensure that we have the tools to adapt and respond to them. And I'll continue working with Republicans and Democrats to ensure just that. Finally, in order to protect our homeland, we must ensure that our physical borders are secure. We need to have secure, safe, and humane conditions at the southern border. That means securing our border to stop people from entering the country illegally, addressing the dangers of cartels, and strengthening efforts to intercept illegal drug trafficking and stop human trafficking. Since entering the Senate, I've made multiple trips to the southern border, and each time I have heard from border agents about the urgent need for additional resources, including personnel, technology, and in some cases physical barriers to help ensure that we have a safe, secure, and humane border. To address these concerns, I helped negotiate and secure $3 billion for border patrol stations and land ports of entry, while continuing to support funding for more border agents and infrastructure. I've also taken action to address the dangerous influx of deadly fentanyl, which has taken just a terrible toll, as we all know, on New Hampshire's families and communities, as well as throughout the country. I've helped pass multiple bills to intercept fentanyl and other dangerous drugs at the border, and will continue to work to confront the smuggling of new synthetic drugs as they evolve. I'll keep working with Democrats and Republicans to pursue objective, fact-based policies that keep our country safe, consistent with our values. As we look toward the future, there is no doubt that we will continue to face new and challenging threats. But there's also no doubt that America, whose vast capacity and devotion to individual freedom and dignity makes it the greatest country on earth, can defeat these threats. And as we do, we must continue standing with freedom-loving people everywhere, something that is ingrained in our Granite State spirit. I'll close with this story. 3 weeks into the invasion of Ukraine, I met with leaders and ambassadors from our European allies. The ambassadors to Poland and the EU asked me, do your constituents care about what's going on in Ukraine? They follow me. I told them how Granite Staters have been asking me about the conflict and calling my office, and I shared how deeply they were following what was happening and how much they care about the Ukrainian people. I told them I'm from New Hampshire. I'd already told them that, but I reinforced it. And when I began to tell them what our state's motto was, before I could get out the word live, they answered in unison, free or die. I told them we take these words very seriously. We mean them. Months later, Ukrainians are fighting with their lives for the freedoms that we have. And the Ukrainians are reminding us of how special our democracy is and how critical it is that we defend it. Maintaining our safety, security, and strengths means remaining dedicated to the values that our service members have fought for and died for, the values that make us the United States of America. We must always remember to put our differences aside for the good of our country, and I'm committed to doing so. No matter the threat, I'll do everything in my power to keep Granite Staters and all Americans safe and secure and free. Thank you, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Here. All right. Well, thank you, Senator Hassan, for your wonderful remarks. As anyone who's been to any of our events knows, there are quite a few challenges going on around the world for us to be considering and thinking about. So that was a great overview of some of the top hits, we'll say. And we will get to your guys' question in a minute. I will say we do have a microphone that Larry will be bringing around. We are recording this for potentially putting it out later. So please do wait for the microphone so that we can get good, crisp, clear audio so that we have something nice for everybody else to listen to. But I'm going to start off with a couple of questions. So, of course, we also saw Speaker Pelosi headed to Taiwan just a few weeks ago, and China responded with massive military drills around Taiwan, really looking at ways in which they would probably blockade the island in advance of a potential invasion. So can you speak a little bit about how we manage the Taiwan issue? It's obviously a very sensitive and tense issue right now, something that really drives the U.S.-China relationship, and we saw China pulling out of many communications with the U.S. on global issues. So can you just give us some of your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so first of all, when you see China's increasingly aggressive behavior economically and militarily, it's really, really important to just reinforce that we have to keep our own military and economic edge. That's one of the reasons that I've been pushing so hard to make sure that we've got our quantum technology investments where they should be, both on the military side and on the commercial side. It's also why it's so important that we continue to push back at China's aggression on the economic front when you're talking about stealing proprietary information or intellectual property. It's also why it is so important at this moment in time that China sees us investing, as we are in the Chips and Science Act, in our own semiconductor production, but also the entire research and development ecosystem that really goes along with that, so they understand we will be self-sufficient economically as well as militarily. The Speaker's visit to Taiwan did not change American policy in any way. As I mentioned, I visited Taiwan with my colleague Senator Coons in 2019. Members of Congress go there all the time. They're an important economic partner. They're a democracy. Last thing I'll say is one of the reasons it's so important that we stay united in supporting Ukraine is that China is watching. Vladimir Putin clearly did not expect that democracies would unite the way they have, did not expect our country's leadership in that regard, and was very surprised by a strong Ukraine, strong in part because of the support that America and our allies provided at the beginning and continue to provide. So one of the things we always have to remember is to stand strong for ourselves and our allies, and not only in the moment, but because other authoritarians like the Chinese government are watching.
And so on that idea of standing strong with allies, you mentioned the withdrawal from Afghanistan and what that has sort of meant internationally. But what I'd like to hear a little bit more about is the ongoing humanitarian crisis there with lack of food, famine, etc. So what is the U.S.'s role in supporting the people of Afghanistan despite our disdain for the current government?
Well, the first priority has to be making sure that we continue to get the people who stood with us in Afghanistan safely to other countries or here. And that means speeding up our special immigrant visa process without weakening it at all. We have to do thorough and intense vetting, but we have to do it fast, and we have to stay committed to the people who are committed with us. And then we have to work with partners in the region, even if they're not officially allies, in figuring out ways to help the humanitarian response. Obviously, what is happening in Afghanistan is a terrible humanitarian tragedy, catastrophe, and I am particularly concerned about women and girls in Afghanistan. I met with a group of women leaders when I was there, and we need to find ways. A lot of women and girls who were leaders in civic society have evacuated outside of Afghanistan, but are still kind of in limbo, and we need to make sure that we can help get them.
Okay. Audience questions? Anyone want to start? Yeah, we'll start with Stuart right there. Stuart was a former intern of the World Affairs Council, so I've got a soft spot for him.
There's the microphone.
Thanks so much, Tim, and nice to finally meet you in person after all of those COVID times. And Senators, thank you so much for coming today. I don't know if Tim said so. I've been studying in Europe, did a master's in international affairs, and one thing in Europe, obviously, as you know, is the food crisis that is now going across Europe because of this next phase of Putin's war, where he's using energy prices and food blockages in order to get his way. So I was wondering if you could talk about some things that the U.S. can do with its partners in order to push back against this really evil act. And then my follow-up question to that is an article I wrote for World Affairs Council's Nord Stream 2. If you could talk a little bit about the updated talks, and how that plays into how the U.S.'s policy can combat this energy price war.
Yeah, so thanks for the question, and obviously Putin is trying to use every lever that he has. It's a positive development that we've gotten at least a ship with grain out of Ukraine. I think everybody here probably knows that Ukraine grows a significant amount of the world's wheat. So when shipments from Ukraine are blocked by Russia, it makes the entire world food supply problematic. And similarly, he's trying to use energy as a lever. We have to work with our allies to see if we can help with some of that, the energy shortage they're seeing. We have to continue to find ways to push Putin to allow food out of the area. We also have to continue our sanctions on Putin, and this is where the sanctions that the administration has developed and a lot of us have supported have been really important. Putin is not able to get critical technological imports right now that allow them to repair not only their weaponry but things like medical equipment. We're continuing to drill down on ways that we can go after him when he tries to evade the sanctions, because at the end of the day, part of our leverage here is bringing his economy to its knees. And that's also why we have to continue to strengthen the alliance or the partnership. We need, I think, to find ways to bring India into the fold more, so that we can have, and maybe work more with Turkey, so that we can have more resources and more partners as we try to get energy. And on Nord Stream 2, obviously, it's really, really important that we stand with allies like Germany and help them with their energy needs so that they are not going to give away too much or become overly dependent.
Right here, white shirt.
Hi, I'm Patrick Long, no relation to the Alderman. And you might have already answered this while I was playing on my phone, and if so, I apologize. But can you explain more about, like, specifically how the CHIPS Act helps us compete with China?
Sure. So it's called the Chips and Science Act, and it does a couple of things. So we've got China investing about $150 billion of its money in semiconductor production. Semiconductors, as I think you all know, is in everything from your microwave to your computer, to your car, to military equipment. Because we only make about 12% of the world's semiconductors here at home right now, it means that we have to rely on imports primarily from South Korea and Taiwan, at a time when, of course, China is becoming more and more aggressive in that whole region, and at a time where there's a worldwide shortage of semiconductors. So by bringing that production back here, one, we are producing the semiconductors that we need for our own consumer goods and for our own military weaponry here at home. Secondly, it creates a lot of good jobs. Third, it increases semiconductor production around the world, which one of the drivers of the nation right now is the shortage of semiconductors. So you increase the supply of semiconductors, you can bring down some of those prices. And the other piece of the bill, the science piece, is really aimed at investing in partnerships like the ones we have in here in New Hampshire. Dartmouth has some, UNH has some, where we are really partnering with businesses on research and development so that we're boosting our economic, our innovation ecosystem essentially. So it's about creating great jobs. It also has workforce development and training components, something I hear about businesses all the time. So it's about strengthening our military, adding to the world supply of semiconductors, and not having to depend on anybody else for the essentials that we need.
All right, we'll go to Dina in the back, and I think we have time for, looking at the time, 2 more questions.
This is more of a domestic question. Manchester has been gradually moving toward...
Dina, sorry, can you hold the mic a little closer?
Yeah, thanks. Manchester has been gradually moving toward a $15 an hour minimum wage by granting this wage to city workers. The school district is also considering for their part-time workers $15 an hour, and I believe has decided on that. However, you have said that you would support a $12 an hour wage. I really think that even $15 an hour is not enough to support a family of 4. Someone would have to have at least 2 jobs. So I'm going to ask you if you'd be willing to consider supporting $15 an hour.
Yeah, I don't think anybody who is working hard 40 hours a week should live at the poverty level, and I am open to $15 an hour minimum wage. Thank you.
Larry, right up here in front. Right here.
Thank you for taking my question. My name is Michael Peterson. I'm a state representative from Nashua. My question is, do you have any thoughts on the current state of American democracy? And do you have any thoughts on what we as a nation can do to strengthen American democracy?
Thank you, Larry, and thank you for your service. And I love seeing colleagues from the state legislature in New Hampshire, because when you come from a state where we have 400 legislators for 1.4 million people, it's a reminder of how critically or how much we value citizen-led democracy. A couple of things. I was raised by a World War II veteran. My dad survived the Battle of the Bulge. He, having seen the threat of fascism and tyranny up close, came home devoted to strengthening American democracy. And he would literally say to us at the breakfast table, so what are you kids going to do for freedom today? Which is kind of a hard thing to answer when you're 10. But his point was that democracy takes engagement, it takes vigilance, it is fragile, and it is wonderful. But that we all really have to invest ourselves in caring for it. I am very concerned about some of the efforts that we have seen around the country to allow partisans to oversee the outcomes of elections, right? As you all know, I advocated for making an exception to the filibuster rule in the United States Senate, which requires a 60-vote threshold for passing most legislation, to pass critical protections for our democracy. Because what we were seeing in states across the country were laws being passed that said essentially if elected politicians in the legislature didn't like the outcome of an election that was run by impartial election supervisors, just the way we happened in New Hampshire, that they could just change the outcome of the election. If that happens, we lose our democracy, right? How do you come back from that? So I think it's critically important that we put safeguards in place to make sure that we understand that elections will always be free, fair, and impartially administered in the United States of America. In the meantime, I think it's really important for all of us to be out talking to our friends and neighbors about getting out and voting and connecting their votes to deliverable results that can make a difference in their lives. I talked about the CHIPS Act just now. I've talked about a number of the things we've done on the security front, whether it's cybersecurity or to protect houses of worship. We just passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which will deliver lower prescription drug prices and lower energy costs for people. That's directly connected to their advocacy and their votes. We passed a bipartisan bill to help veterans who've been exposed to toxic substances, to burn pits. The brave veterans who fought in the global war on terrorism and the Gulf War, they haven't been able to get, up till now, the health care that they earned and deserve from the VA. We passed a bipartisan bill to do that. That was because veterans and their families and all Americans who support veterans, which is everybody, advocated for it, and they voted on it. Those are the things that we have to reinforce to people. Their votes matter, they count, and our democracy is worth fighting for.
All right, well, unfortunately, we've come to time, and I really appreciate the Senator giving us a slice of her time in her very busy schedule. Not only is she campaigning, of course, but still working down in D.C. to pass legislation and move this country forward. So thank you so much for offering your insights into the important issues going on around the world today, and taking the time to meet with some of the voters here.
Thank you very much, and thank you again to the council for everything you all do. Thanks for being here tonight, everybody. Enjoy the weekend.